Okay, today on Pro Mindset, I have a special guest, David Mykel. David, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Craig. Great to be here.
All right, so David, you're one of the more interesting people that we've probably had on this show. You are the founder of Sci-Fi, and you're a clinical psychologist, a personal trainer, a life coach, a breathwork teacher, and a meditation instructor, all in one.
Yes.
And you founded Sci-Fi, and you're going to share what that is, but you optimize the mental, physical, and emotional performance of your clients through training of their brains, their bodies, and their breath.
Yes, sir.
And as a side note, you've been to 52 countries. You're a surfer, a rock climber, a snowboarder, and probably many more things. So welcome to Pro Mindset.
Thank you, Craig. It's great to be here.
Okay, so let's start out by you sharing your story. You're a former baseball player. You have your master's. You're in this calling at the moment where you're helping people. Most people that are in that space, they've gone through something. What is that for you?
Yes. So for me, yeah, well, I'll rewind back almost to like high school to give you this kind of like the shot of it. So I grew up, in a poor immigrant neighborhood, in a pretty rough and tough neighborhood in New York. And so when you're growing up, like in those kind of instances, you kind of look at something that I call the societal blueprint, right? And this is what society tells you to do to be successful and happy and content and fulfilled. And so for me, that was, of course, like, okay, I was in high school and I've always had really good grades, but baseball was my number one thing. That's all I wanted to do when I grew up. I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I had no other aspirations. I worked my butt off. I was one of the top recruited baseball players in all of New York State. I played Division One. And after, I played pro baseball, but then unfortunately, I blew out my knee, and I was being recruited by four teams at that time. These are the organizations: the Dodgers, the Marlins, the Braves, and the Mets. And so all of a sudden, unfortunately, when a catcher blows his knee out, no one wants a 21-year-old catcher with a bad knee. So the Marlins still took a chance on me. I ended up just catching bullpen for them. But at that point, I needed to figure out, I just dedicated 17 years of my life. I was 21 years old to one sole focus, and that was it. And it would be a professional baseball player. And now my identity was stripped away from me. I had no other identity. So I said, well, what am I going to do now? And of course, the societal blueprint came up. So, okay, you go to college, then what do? Well, you can go to grad school. So I went to grad school for forensic psychology. I originally wanted to be a federal law enforcement officer, but my first semester, I got introduced to something called litigation psychology, which I'd never heard of before. Still very young at the time. So I fell in love with that and dedicated my next 2 years in graduate school to that alone. Graduated top of my class, and then got a job working for a litigation consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Kind of fast forward through a couple different, I worked in DC for about, I think, 6 or 7 years, then got recruited to go to Dallas, Texas, which I'd never been before, which was a great opportunity. I was at the top of my field. And then I quit because there was something inside of me that was telling me I wasn't aligned with who I was and what I was supposed to be doing on earth. Now, this was 29-year-old David, so I had no clue about anything back then. But I said, you know what, this isn't working for me. And everyone thought I was crazy. Like, wait, you're going to quit? You have a 6-figure job. You have this amazing career that you've built now for, I think, about 7 to 10 years at that point. And I said, no, I want to take a year sabbatical. I want to travel the world. I want to volunteer. I want to live in the mountains. So my 1 year turned into 3 years around the globe, circumventing the globe twice, volunteering, and then creating what now I realize was the first version of Sci-Fi when I was living in Australia. I used to be a Muay Thai fighter. I got into Muay Thai when I was living in Dallas, Thai boxing for some of you that not familiar with it. And that really taught me a lot of things. Like I had been, again, growing up in a rough neighborhood, I've been fighting my whole life. But I never knew how to actually fight. I never trained martial arts. This was more necessity, not just going out and doing something cool. So I ended up doing the first version of Sci-Fi, working with at-risk Aboriginal kids in Australia, teaching them just basically different ways to use this physical and emotional and mental pain that they had from growing up with typical Aboriginal, typical Native, even our Native Americans here have the same thing. They grew up in these places where there's really no good role models, right? They've been oppressed. Their parents typically are some kind of substance abuse. So that was amazing. I felt great about this. Like, I actually felt fulfilled finally after years. And then I come back. I was like, okay, I got to go back to the U.S. My visa's running out. I need to go back and reset everything. So I come back to the U.S. and I try to get a job doing other things. I didn't want to go back to litigation psychology. I was kind of over it. I didn't feel like it was my purpose. I was just making people money, essentially. Like, I was working on some of the biggest cases in the world, like multi-billion-dollar cases, a lot of stuff that was in the news, really famous. I mean, this was an amazing career that I created, and I loved every minute of it. Especially as a former athlete, I loved the competition. When you go and you're litigating, you're in the courtroom, that's competition at the highest level. People's lives are at stake. Billions of dollars are at stake. You're going against some of the best people in the world. So I loved my profession for a very, very long time. And I still kind of loved it, but I knew it wasn't where I belonged. Well, I came back to New York City, and unfortunately, I was just getting rejection letter after rejection letter, trying to work for nonprofits, trying to do marketing, communications work, because I was a psychologist, and that's what I kind of specialized in when I was a litigation psychologist, was taking these very complex matters and communicating them in these very simple ways. No, I was getting rejection letter after rejection letter. This is kind of funny, because this is when letters were actually sent to people. Like, it wasn't like, oh, they ghost you. It was actually a letter sent to you to tell you how bad you are, or how they didn't want you anymore. And I had dozens of these. So finally, I get a call from a recruiter saying, hey, we saw your profile. We have a position in New York City to essentially take over a company, a multi-million-dollar litigation consulting company. I was like, all right, well, I'm not getting any phone calls from anyone else, just getting rejection letters. Let's talk. The opportunity just seemed too good to say no to it. Again, societal blueprint, right? Now I got to go back. I got to make money, be successful. This will make me happy. So I signed on with this litigation consulting firm in New York City. I'm, 6-figure salary, the apartment, the car, I had the girlfriend. I had the corner office, literally like working on these massive cases. I was being mentored to take over this multi-million-dollar company. I had all the dressings that society told me that if I had these, I would be happy and content and fulfilled. Yet for the first time in my life, I experienced depression. And for a year and a half, I fought suicidal depression, despite being at the top of my career, being one of the top litigation the consultants in the country, having the money, having the fame, having the fortune, like I said, if you named it, I had it. There wasn't anything I was still traveling around, like taking these like awesome vacations. And I sat there as like, something's off and I don't know what it is. And this is when sci-fi started to birth, because I started going to therapy for the first time in my life. I was doing everything that everyone told me to do, but nothing was working. There wasn't a program out there that met me with where I was and for who I was, with my background, the way my brain thought as a high performer, the way I had been programmed through society to be at that point in time. So I started tooling around with things. And about 3.5 years into that new job, I had a meeting with my boss, and thankfully we came to an agreement and she fired me. I was fired for the first time in my career. And this was about 35 years old. So the first time, or 36, I believe. And I got fired, thankfully, because I had been wanting to quit for at least 1.5 years because I've been struggling. But of course, again, the societal programming. You don't leave a 6-figure job in a corner office and a great career that you spent 13 years building for nothing, because I had no clue what I wanted to do in my life at that point in time. So I stayed, and unfortunately, it literally was killing me. I had multiple times where I looked over the train tracks in New York City, and I said, I could just end all this pain and suffering right now. Because Craig, the reality of it, and this is why I started sci-fi, and this is why I'm dedicated to the mission of helping shortcut the struggle for high performers. I don't want someone ever to go through what I went through, to follow the blueprint, to get all the successes, to have the fame, the fortune, and all this stuff, and want to end their lives. People talk about sometimes, I'm having a bad week, I'm having a bad day. Hour by hour, it was a struggle for me. Hour by hour, I was literally could not take the pain internally for years of doing this, despite having a family that loved me, a successful career, money. I had every other stuff that we've been told that if we have these things, we'll be happy, we'll be fulfilled. So after this parting with my boss, I started to figure. I said, okay, I got to figure out how to heal myself. And so I started rock. I'm a rock climber. I was a rock climber, Thai boxer, snowboarder, and surfer. I was like, let's just do the things that I love. And I started realizing a lot of the life lessons that I learned through high-level professional sports were also present in high-level executive white-collar jobs. And then I started integrating these lessons into my trainings. And then I started bringing people in. I started testing this. I'm a social scientist at heart. So I started testing this with my friends and family and loved ones and watched these breakthroughs happen in less than an hour. Like I would like reset their brain from doing these real physically exhausting things, putting them on the edge, literally, of safety through rock climbing and surfing. Rock climbing, there's a sense of falling. Surfing, you can drown or there's sharks in the water. Muay Thai, you can get punched in the face. Like snowboarding, you can fall off the side of a mountain. I started realizing what now I know through studying neuroscience for about 12 years is that these chemical changes would happen and they would open up this entire new perspective in your brain. And what I figured out were they call the 4 Ps. And these are the basis of our B3 methodology, which we can get to in a minute. But I realized that when you identify a problem, then you activate your physiology, you can change your psychology, and then you'll enhance your perspective. So basically, you come into a session with all these things in your mind. I would run you through our what was called the sci-fi system and now the B3 methodology, and you could have a breakthrough around that thing that you were dealing with that you didn't see 60 minutes earlier. And that was the birth of sci-fi. And now here we are 6 years later. We have over 5,000 people that come to the program. Our efficacy rate is above 98%, which I'm really proud of as a social scientist and as a data nerd to say that, hey, our program works that powerfully and that consistently.
Okay, David. So give me an example of a client with no names that has a very common issue with the public. Could be a former athlete that's now in C-suite level business. They're not in alignment with their purpose anymore. That seems like what may have happened to you. You weren't in alignment with your purpose. And when you're not in alignment with your purpose, it's really difficult to be successful. It's difficult to feel joy.
Yes.
So kind of walk through like your typical, there's no typical client because they come from all different places and all different shapes and sizes, but give an example of the aha moments for those people, what your B3 process helps them work through.
Yeah. So I'll give an example of just one of the client I worked with yesterday, right? So this is I've been blessed to work with people from as young as 7 to as old as 77, literally. So the woman that I'm speaking of now is 77 years old. She's an amazing client. She's a retired ER nurse, high performer, super successful, very, very wealthy. And she's kind of going through legacy mode, right? One of the things that we really help with is the thing we found the most powerful for our purpose is through transitions in life. So I think those are the places where we're having the most struggles, right? Is when we're going through transitions, right? I was going through the transition of leaving a career to then coming back to the career, then trying to get out of the career. So those transitions are typically the toughest. And I find this is when we need the most help, we need the most guidance. And I always talk about it as like everyone should have a coach, some way, shape, or form. There's not a high performer that I know that I've ever met, that I've ever read about or studied, doesn't have a coach of some sort in their lives. So for this woman, she's going through legacy mode. And so, like we all have, she's made some mistakes in her life. And she has a daughter and a granddaughter who have followed the mold that I was just talking about, right? Her daughter's a very successful lawyer. Her granddaughter's in college right now, and they're both struggling in these different ways. So I said, okay, we'll call her X, patient X. I said, let's identify the problem. The problem is she's having problems mentoring and being a role model because of the stuff that she's been through. Think about it. She has approximately 7 decades of programming, not only from society, but also her experiences. So yesterday in this 55-minute session, we do a regular psychology session. So this is virtual, by the way. We do sessions virtually and in person, just depends on the client need, but we have clients coast to coast. So I said, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the problem. So the first P, right? talk about the problem. We go, and I'm trained in I am a clinical psychologist trained in cognitive behavioral psychology and positive psychology. Those are my two main methods. And then I've developed dozens of scientifically validated frameworks that walk people through. So these are basically like up to 5 steps that people can walk through to deal with things like worry, anxiety, frustration, thinking, communication issues, relationship issues. So we go through the problem, and I say, okay, X, let's move. So we go through about a 25-minute exercise routine. Now the exercises are very custom. As you said, each client is different. So she's 77, so I don't have her doing HIIT workouts with me, but I did the workout in this. So we're moving together. And the whole point is that we now have the problem identified. We put the problem in the back of your head. And now we go into activating your physiology. Because we know through neuroscience, when you activate your physiology, certain neurochemicals are released. The ones that we're the most kind of happy with are you have dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, anandamide, adrenaline, and endorphins. You put this powerful cocktail of 6 things together and you feel incredible. This is why everyone typically feels really good after a workout, even if it was really hard. Well, what we know is when those chemicals are released, they change the chemistry of the brain. And this is where we get really excited because it goes on to the third P, which is that this is going to change your psychology. So your brain fundamentally has been changed. So if we put you in a functional MRI and looked at your brain in real time from the beginning of the session to now, we're talking about maybe the middle to the 3/4 end of it, your brain looks different. Different parts of your brain are lighting up. They're showing more activity. Now I bring my clients into breathwork and meditation. So this is where we talk about the B3, and I'll explain that in a second. So we bring them into breathwork and meditation because when you're in this heightened state, you're literally high for all intents and purposes on your own supply. You've just generated this amazing feeling in yourself, but you are a bit too high. We need to bring you down to more of a kind of what we call a parasympathetic state, so that which is rest and relax. So that way the brain can now start processing this stuff. And you have this, when we go on to our 4th P, is that your perspective is enhanced. So when she comes out of this guided breathwork and meditation that I bring her through, I say, hey, X, what do you see different than you saw before? And she'll start giving the perspective change. And then I ask her, and this is the key to our philosophy, what's one thing you can do today to take a step towards that? And this is where we call it the power of 1%. Every day, we only need to grow 1%, Craig. Because if we grow 1% over 365 days, aggregating and compounding that, you're 37 times better than when you started. Now, I love Grant Cardone, 10X. Like that's a great philosophy. I study it through Dr. Benjamin Hardy that I'm in a mastermind with. But imagine 37Xing you. 37Xing your health, your wealth, your relationships. That's only from 1% a day. You can get there over a year, and that's nothing. So at the end of the session, she has now a tactic, and this is what we're really known for at Sci-Fi is tools and tactics. She has a tangible tactic that she can do right now. And then she's going to do a little bit different tomorrow, the 1% gain tomorrow and 1% gain tomorrow. And next thing you know, that thing that was plaguing her, that thing that she couldn't sleep about, that thing that she was anxiety ridden about, the thing she couldn't stop talking about, it's gone. It's still there, but she's changed literally from the inside out, and she brought this upon herself. And so this is what we teach our clients is that I don't want to be a coach. I don't want to be someone's coach for the rest of their lives. This is one of the things that I noticed in psychology that didn't work for me is that I would go to my sessions, and I had a great psychologist when I was working with him, but we'd talk about the same stuff over and over and over and over and over again. And next thing you know, and this is what we see very often, and we'll talk about the B3 around this, people go to therapy for years. They talk about the same stuff. I tell my clients day one, if a year from now we're talking about the same stuff, you're going to fire me because I failed you as a coach. We need to keep evolving with this. So for us, it's all about getting out of that, talking about the same thing over and over and over again and finding tools and tactics that you put into place right now that can change your life right now, that can transform your life right now. Yes, we talk about stuff just as traditional therapy does, but the results we have been, I'd say they're astronomical. And this is where I said, for me, go back to my mission. because I don't want someone to go through what I went through. People don't have to suffer like I did. There's no reason that if someone's going through a depressive episode, they have to suffer through suicide for a year and a half. And through the B3, which we can talk about, this is the shortcut that I figured out of how to systematically do this in a way that makes sense with logic, the way our brains are built and the way our bodies have evolved.
Well, David, one of the things that I've seen is that everybody has one thing. They have one thing that preoccupies their mind. It could be financial stress, could be a physical limitation, it could be anything. If you're an athlete, it doesn't matter the sport. If you're a quarterback in football, you might be working on your accuracy. It's one thing. And so it sounds like your process focuses your client on improving that one thing by 1%. And then guess what happens? There's another thing.
Yeah.
And then right? And then another one. And it keeps going. So you mentioned B3 a couple times. So just jump into that and share what that is.
Yeah, so this is our scientifically validated B3 methodology. This is what we've been testing since day one, and we've had the incredible results with. So B3 stands for brain, body, breath. And so first I'll tell you about the philosophy behind it, because this is when I was going through what I was going through, my struggles and my pain, and the fact that I want to take my life despite being at the top of my career and having everything in the world, I was out of alignment. You said this word earlier. And I'll bring this like very simple question to you, Craig. You and I and the rest of our audience, we're all using our brain, our body, and our breath together right now. Like even just me, I'm holding myself up physically. My brain's having to think about what I talk, and I am breathing because I have to breathe. You have to breathe at least, a couple thousand times a day. But here's the problem. These three things we ask them to perform at a high level together, but we train them separately. For our brain, we do things like this. We sit in front of computers, we go to conferences, we read books. We're mostly sedentary, right? Our bodies, if we're normal people, not like professional athletes, we go to the gym. We usually want to tune out our day. We want to forget about our day. Even athletes, sometimes they go into flow states and stuff like that. They're not actively like using their brain because they've been conditioned so much. But we're sitting there using our bodies, but we want our brain to tune out. And then our breath, unless you're an actual breathwork practitioner and think about this daily, no one thinks about it because it's involuntary, and thank God it is. We take 25,000 breaths a day. I wouldn't want to be thinking about that every single second. But again, the logic kicks in, Craig, of how can you ask three things to perform at a high level together if you train them separately? This would be like, going back to your football example, working with a quarterback and saying, we're going to train your left arm today. We're going to train your right arm tomorrow, your left leg the next day. And then the next day after that, we're going to train your right leg. And then we're going to go to the game on Sunday and you're ready to go. It would make no sense. You're training these connected entities separately. But then you're like, I want you to perform at a high level together. My snow athletes, I make the same thing. I said, we're going to train your left leg, your right pole, your right ski, your left ski. And they sit there and they all laugh. I go, yeah, but you do this every single day. So what we realized that as I walked you through that process with my client, we trained her brain through cognitive behavioral psychology and positive psychology. We trained her body, and I'm a certified personal trainer, so I know how to be safe with people. We trained her body by creating that neurochemical change that we know happens through exercise. And this is the cool part, is that you don't have to do these full-blown 60-minute HIIT workouts. There are certain exercises that we figured out that are actually quite simple. Some can be done sitting down that can activate that physiology. And then, of course, as I said before, I can't have a person in this high state start making really crucial decisions. So we bring them down through breath work and meditation so that the clarity comes to them. And when you train the brain, body, breath together, this is where we've had these breakthroughs, like I said, in 55-minute sessions that people have been stuck on for months or years. I've had people come to me, they go, you just combined like 2 years of therapy in 30 minutes. I was like, yeah. Well, that's the power of the B3. When you put these three things together, you can go in at depths and see things that were never available to you before without spending years to go after it. Because, and this is why it's such a powerful message for me and my mission, I didn't have years, Craig. I had daily bouts where I wanted to take my life. Some people don't have years to figure this out. Some people don't have the financial means to figure that out, right? So this is where I said we've combined 4 people into one coach. and say, hey, this is what we're going to give you. And our results are going to be fast. Because I work with high performers, and let's be honest, Craig, patience is not something that high performers do well with.
Exactly.
We all like to be in control, and we all don't have a lot of patience. So this is why I've created this program around high performers, because I was the first client. And now that's why I tell people, it's like, you can trust me because not only do I have the accreditations and the degrees and the experience, but I put myself through everything I teach. There's nothing that I teach that I haven't vetted through my own experience to see it works on me first. Then we can bring it to other people.
How easy is it for clients to do a session with you and then self-medicate, so to speak, on their own afterwards through the exercise and breathing?
How simple is it? Is that what you're saying? Like once we teach them the first time? Yeah, I mean, it takes a little bit. So to give you an idea, when we work with clients one-on-one, there's a 3-month commitment to start. The reason why we do this is that research has shown that no sustainable behavior change happens in under 12 weeks. So we can create a breakthrough in one session, but again, you have habits that you've had for years or decades that need to be rewired, right? Because you have, to go into neuroscience just for a second, you have neurons that have been, Hebb's law, neurons that fire together, wire together. These things have been firing and wiring together for years. This is why we have habits of what we do. And then what happens is that we have this sheath called myelin, which goes around the neuron, which insulates it. The more myelinated a neural connection is, the faster it happens. This is why we can have habits that we're not even aware of, right? So I'll give you an example that a lot of us deal with. A lot of us deal with procrastination in some way, shape, or form without even talking about what it really means and what's really going on. And this could just mean not having a difficult conversation with a loved one, not sending that email, waiting until the end of the deadline to get that thing going. And what do? We'll go to social media to distract ourselves, get little dopamine hits, right? We'll jump on YouTube. We'll do these things to distract ourselves because we've been ingratiated with it because of our phones. And these things are becoming, these are emblematic of where we are as things in society. But what we need to understand is that you can't break that instantly. Sometimes you can. These are called lightning bolt moments. These do happen. But from a scientific perspective, which we are a very science-based program, you have to have that consistency. So when the consistency is there, absolutely, clients take this on, and you'll see that in weeks their lives are changed. Typically, like we work with clients for a few years, and we just had actually 5 clients graduate. They worked with us for about a year and a half to 2 years, and completely rewired their brain and changed them. Now that's 5 people in a year and a half. Most psychologists see people for 5 to 7 years before they graduate and move on. This will give you an idea of kind of how powerful our program is. And this is why I'm so passionate about it, because I know that the way things have been done in the past don't work for a certain population of people. That's us, high performers. This program, from what I've seen so far, yeah, we're onto something really big.
Okay, so let's bring this down to the court, to the field. Let's take it to the sports arena just for a moment, to the diamond.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so let's just take Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say there's a young man right now that's dabbling with 400, but let's say you got an average guy that bats 300, but when there's guys on base, he bats 200, or when the bases are loaded, he bats 100. So the bigger the moment, the less successful he is. If it's a Major League Baseball player, how would you describe their issue?
Yeah. So first, working with athletes now for years, and being a former, high level athlete myself, the number one thing I see that athletes are plagued by, and this is amateur, high level amateur, pro, retired pro, is the fear of failure. This is the thing that drives the ones that have these kind of hangups. So this guy, you're looking at 300 batting average, which is like, that's near like a Hall of Fame, to 100 with the bases loaded, right? So what's going on? He has an intense fear of failure, because when nobody's on, there's nothing to really fail. There's no one else attached to him, right? Baseball is a very team-oriented sport. But as soon as there's this level of people relying on him, and we'll talk about this in a second, he starts developing meanings. So we'll go, I'll give you this one thing to think about for your audience. Our brains are meaning making machines. They're making meaning about everything. You're doing it right now. I'm doing it right now. You're looking at me. Why is he wearing black? Why is everything black? What does that mean? I'm looking, why does he have a Kansas City, banner behind him? Who's that kid behind him, right? Why does he have that microphone and not the microphone that I have? Our brains are constantly doing this, and we can't stop it.
That's true.
Yeah, we can't stop it. We don't want to stop it because here's the truth, Greg. We look at a lot of things through an anthropological lens because we have to go back to understand. We have to go back in the past to understand our present in a lot of ways. Our brains became this way because they needed to understand safety around us, right? So I'll give you a quick example. I call it the caveman example, right? Let's go back a couple 100,000 years, our ancestors, Craig. So we come out of the cave. If our brain's not scanning our environment constantly and doesn't notice that the river we get our water from is drying up, we're going to die of dehydration. If our brain doesn't scan and realize the tree we're getting our fruit from is withering away, we're going to die of starvation. If it doesn't realize that thing moving on the horizon isn't a bush or a tumbleweed, it's actually a saber-toothed tiger, we're going to be someone's dinner. So our brains are constantly scanning, looking for not only negative things first. This is why it's so much easier to be negative and go in those spirals when we have bad days than it is to have good days, because our brains are conditioned for this for at least hundreds, 200,000 years, give or take a few years. And then they're making meaning. What does this mean? What does it mean the river's drying up? What does it mean that the tree is withering away? So our brains have had to do this literally for 200,000 years as Homo sapiens. Now, fast forward to our baseball player. He's had that conditioning for years now, for hundreds of thousands of years. Now he has his own conditioning of, well, what it means when I strike out on bases loaded, it means I'm a failure, right? If I don't, advance a guy on base, it means that I'm not a team player. I can't be relied on. And so he keeps playing this record in his head over and over again of this meaning, of this meaning, of this meaning. And of course, sports are based on performance, right? It's not about how hard it's great. I mean, as a father, this, you want to reward your children for trying their best, right? For doing their best, for the effort they're giving. Sports aren't like that. Sports are all about, yep.
I thought I had that on Do Not Disturb.
That's okay.
Keep going.
Yeah, so sports are all about the performance. So now what this guy has is what most clinicians would diagnose him with is performance anxiety. Well, performance anxiety is just fear of failure. Because if he feels like he fails, he lets down himself, he lets down his teammates, he lets down maybe his parents, because a lot of stuff will go deep. This is why it takes months sometimes to really root some of this out, because he may have something inside of him, and I had this too. I grew up fairly poor. My mom sacrificed. I grew up with a single mother. She sacrificed everything for me to be at the level I was and to have the opportunities I had for baseball. I didn't want to disappoint her. I wanted to make her proud. So if I struck out, that means I was a failure, and I was failing my mother, and I was disrespecting my mother, and I was telling her that what she did wasn't enough. Imagine that running through a batter's head when he's standing at the plate and there's a 90-mile-an-hour fastball coming at him inside. But this is what's going on. This is what's causing the performance anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that this is 100% for this player, but if you get, one of my goals as a psychology fitness coach is to be able to spend 5 minutes with someone and be able to diagnose them. I'm getting close. I'm not there yet, but I would say with this player, he's probably got some of that stuff going on. He's had failures in his past where he's had these mental markers placed, right? He maybe struck out bases loaded to like at states when he was in college or high school, and he lost the game. And then his friends didn't want to talk to him afterwards, and his girlfriend broke up with him. That meaning is still embedded in his brain because that was a really emotional moment. Our hippocampus holds on to the memories that have more emotion to them more than anything else. This is why if I asked you, Craig, what'd you have for breakfast, 10 days ago, you'd probably have no clue unless you eat the same thing over and over again. But if I asked for a monumental moment from 10 years ago in your son's life, you would know details that were striking that could paint a picture. Why you had emotion tied to that, not emotion tied to your breakfast. So same thing with this batter. He's up there. His brain is making meaning out of everything. right? He's got these neurons that have fired together for years because he's human, not just because he's who he is because he's human. These things have been going on. His brain is negatively oriented through an evolutionary standpoint. And if he's had anything happen to him in his life, where as high performers, we're always pushing our edges. So we constantly find that edge and fall off and have these things happen. He's got these mental scars. So that poor guy's going up there. And that's why he only bats 100 when the guys are on base, because all that comes up. When no one's on base, all that's gone. He's sitting there hitting 300-400.
Well, David, two thoughts in response to that. Number one is that everybody has a story. And after you strike out for the first time with bases loaded, you're going to write a first draft of your story related to that. And that's something you're going to take with you to the next time that you are in the batter's box and the bases are loaded. And other people's comments after that failure, your manager, your coach, your teammates, your parents, different people like that, you add that to your story. And you have to rewrite your story to change your performance in those situations. If you don't rewrite your story, it's going to repeat itself. And the second thing is with respect to emotion, I really believe that, like, if you're playing in the NFL and let's say you're a safety and you have an understanding of the play call, your alignment, your assignment, your keys, what you're supposed to read, but then you also have an emotion. And so if you prepared appropriately for the game, you did your advanced study like you were supposed to, and you recognize the personnel, you recognize the formation, you recognize the motion, you know what's going to happen before the ball snapped. And you have an emotion of confidence. You have these emotions that, like, I got this. Or you have this emotion, I wish I knew they were going to run this play. I mean, it's in nanoseconds that you're having these thoughts in your mind. I knew they were going to call this play on 3rd and long, an important situation, but I didn't study enough to know what they're going to do. So I hope I'm good.
Yeah. You brought up a key word there, Craig, because this is one of the things. So I've been studying humans for 25 years and over 25 years. And high performers is what I've focused on since day one. Like, that's what I've been my whole life, and that's who I help. There's this one critical thought that I've realized that every single high performer suffers from. It's this inner core belief, in psychology we call it a limiting belief, of I'm not enough. And it's interesting because there's a lot of us, and I did this for a very long time myself, that take that and harness it to work harder, right? The reason why I did so well in my career and in baseball was because I worked my butt off. Nobody outworked me. But I was working under the premise of I'm not enough, trying to prove myself wrong. So it wasn't a healthy drive. So you're going back to this football player, right? I didn't study enough, right? The batter, I haven't put myself in these situations enough, right? Maybe he's seeing a sports psychologist or someone or a coach. I'm not opening up to them enough. All of us are playing this game. I'm not thin enough, rich enough, handsome enough, beautiful enough, athletic enough, fit enough, successful enough, whatever it is. We play this game constantly. And what ends up happening, and I want to make a little distinction between emotions and feelings. An emotion is a healthy reaction to an outward stimulus. So you have an emotion of sadness, an emotion of anger. Those are healthy, natural reactions to what's going on around us. The problem is emotions only last for about 30 to 120 seconds, what the research shows. After that, this is when our brain kicks in, because our brains are so powerful. This makes us so dominant and on Earth, basically, is because of our intellect. The meaning-making machine kicks in, and it assigns meaning to the emotion, and that turns into a feeling. And we let feelings drive us. Because I'll give you a really easy one that everyone can relate to. I feel alone. Yet you're surrounded by people. You have people in your life that love you, that want to be there for you, but you feel alone. That's not an emotion. That's a feeling. And it's driven by the meaning-making machine that we all have that's been conditioned through things like the societal blueprint, through our experiences, right? This guy, he struck out and he lost the game for his team and his girlfriend left him, or, his dad, and it doesn't have to be something big like that, Craig, and you know this as a father too. It could be his dad said one thing to him in the car ride home, 5 seconds. You really should have swung, because maybe he went down looking. You really should have swung the bat. And this gets me emotional because I know that feeling. And I didn't have my dad there, so this is not my own thing, but this is like the feeling, the empathy that I have for my athletes. That kid now takes that, and that's it. So when he now strikes out, when he goes down looking, when he's got bases loaded, all that tension and anxiety from that 1 5-second thing that his dad said to him when he was 17 years old, 16 years old, right? And now he's a 31-year-old professional baseball player. That's in his brain. And this is like I said, we talked about this before we jumped on, is why I'm obsessed with the human mind, because our minds are so powerful and they do these things. And some of us team it and we become incredible. Most of us, we don't know how to. And this is why I said I started sci-fi, because there wasn't programs out there that taught me and met me where I was. And so I'll say one more thing this is why I love Yogi Berra's famous quote: baseball is 90% mental, 10% physical. I was watching Conor McGregor's documentary the other night, and he said the same thing. So he didn't quote Yogi Berra because they were talking about MMA to him. One of the best MMA fighters ever lived, despite what you think of him as a person. He even said it. He's like, he even went as far to go. He's like, I think it's 100% mental. And we know this. This working with pro athletes. Once you get to that certain elite level, the only difference on the field is neck up. Neck down, you're pretty much on almost on the same level. Some people are a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, but you're not talking about huge spaces anymore, like college to, say high school to like Division I or to pro. It's up here. And this is what I love and I specialize in. When I work with my athletes, I said, this is what we got to really work on, because physically I can't. I work with a lot of skiers and snowboarders up in Colorado. I can't do the tricks that they do. I'm working with literally pros. They're doing things that I'll never be able to dream to do. I can't teach them how to do that, but I can definitely teach the neck up. And that's where you see them have these huge breakthroughs of all of a sudden they're landing tricks that they, in snow athletes, they'll land tricks in practice, but then they go to competition and they can't land tricks. Again, number one thing, performance anxiety, fear of failure. Yep, that's it, man.
Well, one of the things that I have in pro mindset, David, is the idea that you have to tackle your thoughts. And when you tackle your thoughts, there's really a couple different types. One is the things that people said to you that you've allowed to be parasites and attach to you and carry with you. And in a lot of ways, you make it into baggage. You carry it with you. It's really difficult to perform your best when you got a lot of bags. I tell people you got to travel light and have a backpack.
I love that.
The second one is no one said anything to you. You did it to yourself. You didn't prioritize. You had a sleepover before a big game. You got 2 hours sleep. How did you expect to, perform? So it's like bad decisions. It's things you did to yourself to sabotage yourself. You've got to forgive yourself, and you got to forgive those others for what they did. And then you have things that just happen in life. Like you do get fired. You do get rejected. Not everybody can take the prettiest girl to prom. She's only going to have one date. There's only one starting pitcher game 1 of the season. You might be in the bullpen. You might start off as a one of the other starters. When you're in those types of situations, you tend to beat yourself up. And so it's the idea of, can you show up for the competition without all that mental baggage? And when you show up to the competition and my final thought on this is that if you can build a wall, in ancient times, cities had walls. They had walls for a reason, to protect. To allow the women and children to play freely. As a performer, you want to play freely. So you have to build a wall. And in that wall, you bring to the competition what's for you, and you keep out what is not. And in doing that, you make a transition from your mind to your heart. So if you see somebody, like, it could be, the Nuggets in the finals with the Heat tonight. It could be, any type of like competition where you're watching the tempo, the pace, the commitment, the energy of a player, of an athlete. When they're playing in their heart, they're letting it all hang. They have no fear of failure. When they're in their head, they have lots of fear of failure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Your thoughts on that?
100% agree. So at Sci-Fi, we have this thing called a 12-inch traverse, right? So approximately, depending on how tall you are, I'm 5'10", so my heart and my head are about 12 inches apart. But I may know something logically, but I don't know it here. And sometimes it takes a lifetime for something to do to traverse that 12 inches, right? Like you said, going out there with no baggage. Like we're talking about flow states, right? How to get into a flow state instantly. We're talking about, you start with the starting picture. What does he have going on in his head? The guy who's not starting, the guy who's in the bullpen, he's just running meanings through his head. Oh, I didn't, and listen for the E word here. I didn't train hard enough. I didn't run hard enough. I didn't throw hard enough. I'm not enough. That's why I'm not the starting pitcher. And that just ruminates in his head going all day, right? And because the meaning-making machine doesn't stop. But as you said perfectly, when you can kind of get out of your head and go into your heart, the heart doesn't have the meanings there. The heart is just pure. And I will be honest, Craig, this is something I'm studying like a lot this year because it's not something that I have a complete handle on. There's a lot of things that I know logically that I've known for years that I don't live from here. We all do. And this is why I say I'm just as human as everyone I work with. The reason why I think my clients relate to me and they say this is because they're like, you really empathize at a level that we don't see very often. It's like, yeah, I've been there, or I'm there now. And then to go back to your wall example, I love that. And here's the way that I think about this is that we have that wall around us, but people are still trying to attack. Well, what we teach people is to say, those things that are attacking you, we call it the villain voice, that voice inside your head that just talks trash to you all day. We give you tools and tactics to defend that wall. So we're the ones that are giving you the hot oil. We're giving you the fire. We're giving you the arrows. Here's the things you're going to use to fend off those attacks. Because if you don't even address the attacks, your walls are eventually going to crumble. There's going to be a time when those walls get knocked down, and that's just time. So I love the analogy of the walls. Like I said, for us, we do the tools and tactics to help people defend that. And then going from the head to the heart, this is where when people graduate from Sci-Fi, they've made that transition. Because I can talk about things here like, hey, watch out the meaning that you're putting on stuff when you have these situations happen to you, right? When your dad said that thing in the car to you after you struck out with bases loaded, he didn't mean that you weren't enough or he didn't love you or that you suck. He meant that, hey, I wish this is something you could have tried. But maybe he didn't have the right vernacular to give it to you. I wish you would have swung. Instead of saying, hey, what do you think you could have done differently, Craig? Well, I could have swung, Dad. At least went out swinging. Yeah. That little change and exchange would make a huge difference because now little Craig doesn't have that meaning that big Craig does. Bases loaded, bottom of the ninth, down by 4.
David, I think that I'll add to that, and that to really get in flow state, you have to have a 7-year-old energy. So if you think back
about that,
well, think about go back. Let's go back to when you were 7, and you were playing baseball in the park in New York City, and it was just for fun. Wasn't for a scholarship. You didn't have anybody watching unless somebody was walking down the street and stopped for a second to watch. It was for the pure joy of competition and hanging out with your friends. That is 7-year-old energy. It's the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the connection that you have with other guys that you're playing with there's no like expectations. That's when you can play your best.
I want to thank David Mykel for joining Pro Mindset Podcast today. We had some technical difficulties at the end of our podcast, and so it may sound like it abruptly ended because it really did. If you are interested in checking out David, you can check him out at psyfi.com, psyfi.com. And I want to thank you for listening today. I want you to go out and have an awesome day today.
I want to thank you for tuning in to Pro Mindset Podcast. If you enjoyed the listen, please leave a 5-star rating. If the message was a vibration you connected with, and you have any friends, family, or colleagues who would benefit, then please share this episode with them. You can follow Pro Mindset Podcast on the following social media platforms: Instagram and YouTube, Pro Mindset Podcast; Twitter and Facebook, Pro Mindset Pod; LinkedIn, Pro Mindset. We will drop our shows, Pro Mindset Podcasts, every Wednesday morning, and we invite you to listen and subscribe. Also, don't hesitate to check out our archives to listen to previous shows. And finally, I encourage you to embrace a Pro Mindset truth from today's show. It just might be the key to unlock the pro inside you.